listening to the 14th source for all geeky and nerdy news and discussion, which means that you're listening to a podcast.
For all intents and purposes.
I am D. Bethel.
And I'm Andrew Asplund.
And we are your two overeducated, codependent nerd hosts, bringing you things that we like to talk about, but filtered through inquisitive and critical lenses in the episode for Friday, August 12th, 2022. And we gotta blow the dust off here. It's a little, for us...
Let's not make coughing jokes right now, thank you.
Fair enough. Sorry, Andrew is ill with an unspecified illness.
No, it's fucking specified. It's COVID, man.
Andrew got the Rona, as they say. How you doing, bud?
Oh, well, it's comically, actually, we didn't do an episode last week, and it kind of worked out because I wouldn't have been able to do one last week, given the timing we normally record and how COVID did. It wasn't super bad, but it was definitely bedridden for a day or two. There were some bad times, it sounds like. Yeah, it was not it was not a pleasant experience.
And honestly, my anxiety is through the roof because, as I think we talked about last week, I have been traveling, which means actually I have been on a plane now twice, and it's still a scary world, is what we're trying to say, dear listeners.
It is. It really, I think, the big takeaway here is that August may just be a rough month for ye old podcast.
Right. It's just about survival at this point. The big question here is, and I think we all know the answer, Andrew, you're on the mend. You're feeling okay, at least better.
Yeah, I know. I'm back to my original stance of coughing and snotting. Is it allergies? Right.
Good. That's the baseline. Is always,
do you have COVID symptoms? I have since 2015. Yeah, so I'm back to that.
No,
so,
you've had those symptoms since I've known you. So
I know, but they've definitely gotten worse in the last X years, where X is an integer greater than 3. Yeah, so no, I'm past it. I think we'll find out if I have any long symptoms. Right, that's something you don't find out until it's been long. If I find out that this cough is forever, great. Oh.
But since we are short right now, let's talk about the things that have been making us happy despite illness and distance. So we're going to discuss our respective weeks in Geek. So if you don't mind starting, Andrew, especially considering the situation, what has been your week in Geek? Bring you joy, at the very least, comfort.
Yeah, comfort and joy. Well, so actually, it's funny you mentioned that this is quite a horror, and I would say this has really been a survival horror. So as it ends up, one of the things I've spent an inordinate amount of time in my, I don't want to use the word convalescence, isolation.
There you
go. Has actually been Resident Evil. And this is interesting. So it depends on how I feel about how much I'm going to talk about, because there are multiple Resident Evil for which I've actually been entertaining myself with.
So many Resident Evil, it may have been a biohazard?
It may have been a regular biohazard. So one thing is, for those who don't know, they're Netflix, which used to be a streaming service people subscribe to, has they got basically, I guess, the license to do a Resident Evil TV show. And they did. It's a single season, clearly intended to be more than one season. Clearly, probably not going to get a second season. First of all, because it's Netflix, and second of all, because it was not well received.
There was a recent Resident Evil movie too, if I'm not mistaken.
I don't know about those. Those movies.
And it was not well received either.
Well, the first 2 or so were kind of neat, and then they kept making them, and you're like, "What's going on?"
No,
here?
So they did a reboot. It's not connected to the Paul W.S. Anderson series at all.
Are you sure you're not talking about the TV show?
I don't know. I don't know.
It looks like there was a movie in 2021 called, quote, Welcome to Raccoon City, which I think is unrelated. Yes, that's what I'm hearing. Yeah, I think it's unrelated to anything else. However, so I watched this TV show. It's 10 episodes, I think, but they're Netflix episodes, so some of them are way long.
Isn't that a Virtua Fighter character?
Wait, yeah. And so I watched it. It's a show.
All right, that's a good start.
So the one thing that's weird is the creator had talked about how the way it was developed was this idea that it was canonical with all the games that had come out at the point where they started working on it. What does that mean? Is that at least the main numbered games? Who knows about all the Bizarro spin-offs?
I'd say that probably brought them up to 7.
I think 7. I think it's pre-Village.
Yeah, okay.
Although who knows, right? Maybe the Village works too. So it's supposed to be this show that you watch it And it's not clear at first, right? Because let me tell you, when you start watching the show, there's actually 2 shows that are running simultaneously, and they're only loosely related, which is part of the problem. There's one that's like in this post-apocalypse where the zombies have kind of taken over everything and everything sucks. And we're seeing the story of this young woman as she's like doing some science to study zombies, and then she gets captured and story ensues. And we have this other story set in 2022 about a father and his 2 daughters moving to this town, New Raccoon City.
Okay.
And their like domestic life. Now I'm gonna drop some names here. So the main character of the post-apocalyptic world is a woman named
scientist.
Yeah, the scientist lady is a woman named Jade Wesker.
Uh-oh.
Right.
Does she have cool sunglasses?
She does not.
Oh.
Now, the domestic family in 2022 is actually it's a father with his 2 daughters, twin daughters, but they're it's revealed they're both what's the word? They were surrogated or whatever. So they have same father, I guess, but different mothers. But the father is a man named Albert Wesker, and his 2 daughters, Jade and Billy Wesker.
Wow.
Okay. And so that's the connection, is that you realize very quick that the character you're seeing in the future is one of the characters from this thing. Now, it's a weird show.
You know what, though? Like, as even just kind of an outside observer, I felt like the series wanted to be about Wesker anyway.
It did. Well, it kept bringing him back.
Right. And here they've just gone and done it. So fair enough.
It's weird. And there's a big spoiler. I don't like anyone who's played the games will acknowledge, like, wait, Wesker dies multiple times, but pretty finality dies in Resident Evil 5, to which I'll say, yes, he does.
Okay.
And also, of course, Wesker is played by Lance Reddick, I believe his name is.
Oh,
right?
Really?
Yeah.
All right.
Which
all of a sudden we got a big old check mark in the positives corner.
He's actually he's a really great actor. He's done some great
awesome.
work. It's a little bit weird. So he's black, and the character of Wesker technically has this weird eugenics background, which is there's a little bit of weirdness when you put that in your head together. Like, wait,
yeah,
but whatever. Honestly, I don't care. He's great. He plays his character, Albert Wesker, and his 2 daughters. And I'll say that 2022 show about, like, because what you realize is New Raccoon City is a company town in South Africa that is owned by Umbrella.
Oh,
right.
That's interesting. Okay.
And it's all about kind of how Albert Wesker is working for Umbrella for the CEO who's got a name. She's just, a new character, but she's the daughter of a character from Resident Evil mythology. Marcus, I believe. One of the founders of Umbrella Pharmaceuticals.
Sure.
And she mentions that actually she talks about her father in some point, who he's featured in Resident Evil 0. He turns into a weird lich monster, but that's neither here nor there. Not lich monster, leech monster. Sorry, lich monster is different. He turns into a leech monster. Anyway, so it's this kind of domestic thing where dad goes to work and the daughters go to high school and they struggle with moving to a new community, all in the backdrop of like this Umbrella stuff, right? Mm-hmm. And eventually, of course, it kind of spirals because things happen and
zombies, I'm guessing.
Well, it's because the idea is what they reveal is that all the zombie outbreaks that we know about were all basically like we're covered up, right? The original Raccoon City is destroyed by a nuclear weapon in Resident Evil 3, so like that's it's just gone, it's covered up. And it's kind of sold as like a maybe not a nuclear weapon, but it's destroyed, and they say, it was just like a gas leak, gas leak destroyed the whole city.
Wow. Talk about an infrastructure problem.
So the idea is that Umbrella is still doing business, and they're still doing the kind of stuff that they do. So that part was really interesting, and then it would cut away to the future where you're like, oh, what are we watching? And it kind of like it's this weird, like, I guess I don't really like the whole post-apocalyptic thing is like, yeah, I've seen a lot of that. I don't care about this. To me, Resident Evil was never about the post-apocalypse, right? And so that part is like, that's the part where I tuned out a lot more. Like, I still watched it, but I was like, oh, come on, can we just get through this shit? And I feel bad because actually I think had they just done the weird, teenage girls finding out that their dad, because there's actually a scene in like the 3rd episode that I think summed up the show really well. Or at least what it could have been. And it's basically one of the daughters gets picked on at school. She's basically like a vegan pacifist. Okay. And she gets picked on and someone like attacks her, whatever, like tries to beat her up. And so her sister, Jade, goes and like basically like gets back at the girl that attacked her sister.
Right.
Cool, right? And of course, there's a big trouble. They get called to the principal's office. And it's this scene where you've got Lance Reddick as Albert Wesker. And the idea is everyone there like works for Umbrella, right? And they're talking like, well, your daughter attacked my daughter or whatever. And then finally he's like, he does the thing where it's like, well, do you know who I am? Right? Do you realize who I am? And it's interesting because...
It's weird because it's Lance Reddick. He still takes out a comb and apparently combs tall hair that isn't there, but he does it.
There's a scene where they have him with hair and it looks really bad. Like, oof, you made Lance Reddick have this weird like wig. But so that's that kind of show where like, yeah, man, Dad's doing something weird. We live in this weird town. The girls don't know anything about it, but they start discovering stuff kind of accidentally, kind of whatever. And it ends with like a big everything's gone to shit, right?
Sure. It's an interesting premise because like I think you're right. Leaning into that angle more than the post-apocalyptic angle actually I think is a better onboarding tool, not only for maybe just Resident Evil viewers to kind of push past the stigma of the movies and stuff like that, but also for Netflix fans. Like one of the most popular shows on Netflix is an original show called Virgin River. It's just like a domestic drama, right? It's kind of like a Gilmore Girls kind of thing, right? Mm-hmm. It's about local town. It's a small town, and everybody's breaking each other's hearts, basically, right? And it seems like it's taking that blending with. I don't know if you ever saw the show Eureka,
just a little bit,
which is like kind of like it's a tiny town in like the very north of California. It's like basically like it's Eureka, California, right? Or
right, where they like hide scientists and stuff.
Right. It's like all the super scientists are there, and like. But it's still wholesome. It's still like innocent in a way, but almost like taking that kind of premise, this sort of like saccharine almost drama and sort of small town mystery even, and then just throwing like zombies and shit in there could be a really interesting show. And it's too bad that they didn't just bet all on that and had to go like the Terminator route of like, John Connor is actually a weathered war hero, right?
Right, and that's actually kind of like what I was thinking of is like, wow, it's like they didn't watch the Terminator movies where they went to the future, which I would argue are the worst, right? Like, I don't want to see the future. I want to see people stopping the future from happening. So yeah, it was like that part of the show I thought was interesting. Lance Reddick is great. There's a big spoiler in like the 7th episode where they kind of talk about like for anyone that's a fan of the show, like how is it he's Albert Wesker, right? And they have a thing where they address that, and it's very silly. And Lance Reddick gets to appear on screen with some really notable actors.
Hey, you know what, everybody? If you don't want to be spoiled, skip ahead 30 seconds. Andrew. Go ahead.
It's revealed that he's one of 3 clones that Albert Wesker made of himself. So there's a scene where it shows like, 10 years ago, which shows like this is where you see Lance Reddick with like hair looking like Wesker from the games, like wearing like black leather jacket shit and having sunglasses. And then there's these 3 clones that are all kind of like dipshits. Right. And so the idea is that one of the main character we've been following is one of those 3 clones.
Gotcha.
And so it's actually ends up being like that. It's like, that's fine. And of course, one of the other clones shows up and is actually even more of a dipshit.
Okay.
Like a goofball. Right.
You know what? You're not turning me off.
Right. Except that you have to watch through this weird post-apocalyptic stuff, which is like, what am I watching?
So I guess the question is, if season 2 drops, are you going to hop on that right away? Would you... Oh, interesting. Okay, so why?
Well, because the problem is that the fun teenage girls, living their life, that kind of ends at the end of season 1. Like,
really?
Shit goes down. Like they end up blowing up Umbrella. They end up blowing up the factory in the town and like running off. So like. It's the kind of thing where, like, whatever they're going to start doing from there is going to be more of, like, it'll be like a Terminator 2 thing. Where, like, or I guess Terminator, whatever. Like, we're hiding from the bad guys. We're, whatever. And that's fine. But it's not as, it isn't as charming as, like, we're just high school girls that, by the way, our dad works for a super creepy pharmaceutical company that makes zombies.
It'd be cool if they did, like, an anthology-style series where they always have that future post-apocalyptic thing, but every season, like the modern story is different actors, different story kind of thing, and eventually leading up to there.
And there's things they could have done, and they're not going to.
Hire us, Netflix.
But so I mentioned that, and that's one thing that in my survival horror, and I guess I have some time. I want to also talk about the other thing I've been doing in conjunction with this is I've been playing Resident Evil 3. Which is the remake of the original Resident Evil 3 Nemesis.
For PlayStation 1.
Which was an unfortunate PlayStation 1 game.
Okay, that was late.
Yeah, it was because it came out after the Dreamcast Resident Evil had come out. So it was already kind of like...
Code Veronica?
Yeah, Code Veronica. So Resident Evil Nemesis came out after Code Veronica, or around the same time, one of the two. But looked like shit and played like shit. And also, like, I'll tell you, if you play the original... the original Resident Evil 3 Nemesis has some real unfinished game vibe to it, I'll tell you. Like, the opening 10 minutes don't actually make sense. Like, they do now, by the way. The remake actually, like, oh, that's what was going on. So it's a remake. It's in the same vein as the Resident Evil 2 remake that they did. So it's,
which was good. Like, people loved that.
Yeah, it was a funny, and this is not a bad game. I actually think it's a lot of fun. The one thing I will say is it's short, like all Resident Evils actually are. Right? Like, you can finish it in, like... I mean, the fact that there's an achievement or whatever for finishing it in, like, less than 2 hours or 3 hours. Like, these games are not super long. But the idea is that your first playthrough, it takes you a while because you die some, you try
even
again.
Shorter when you're stuck in quarantine.
Yeah, well, right? So it's interesting to replay a game that I always kind of loathed, is just being like such a phoned-in Resident Evil, to actually like, oh, this is all right now.
Yeah, so that's the question I was going to ask you. Like, what were your initial thoughts back in the day of Resident Evil 3? They seem to be low, mostly because it felt unfinished. It felt like second tier compared to what the other products they were pushing.
What they were already doing elsewhere, and it kind of felt like it was just this. And the one thing is, in this game does the same thing, is it reuses a lot of assets from Resident Evil 2.
Oh, interesting.
Because the idea is it takes place at the same time. Like, you're in Raccoon City doing similar stuff. So they do that here, but it doesn't hit the same as it did in the original Resident Evil 3. Because the original Resident Evil 3, it felt like, oh man, you couldn't even render new backgrounds, right? Like, that's what it felt like. Here it's like, oh, okay. There's some context to it that makes some sense.
So was there a hook aside from that? Like, oh, this is a side story, a gaiden, for like a better word.
Well, comically, it is kind of a gaiden, isn't it?
Right, except we put a number on it.
We put a number on
Nemesis, right? That's the thing.
Right. The whole thing is and that's the idea, is it's a chase where you're kind of, he's like chasing after you a lot. On the original PlayStation, that worked really weird because, the whole doors thing. And for people don't know what I mean by that, is like when you opened a door, like that was a loading screen. So like it kind of like, you
killed the momentum.
It killed the momentum and also like shifted what was going on, right? Like if zombies were chasing you, they stopped through the door.
Well, sure.
However, the new
it's
Resident
a small
Evil
opening.
Yeah, Resident Evil 2, that's not true anymore, right? They follow you all the time. Like, and that was, in fact, when I played the first Resident Evil, or the remake of Resident Evil 2, I even complained, oh man, I can't just run into the next room anymore. Right. But you get used to it, so that works a little bit better here. I think the game it has a little bit more coherence about what's going on. Like, I understood the story better.
They put some work into it.
Arguably, they kind of finished what was, they fleshed out what was there. And I would say the one thing I do appreciate is it did give me a reason, similar to the original Resident Evils. There's like stuff to unlock by playing through the game a lot. Mm-hmm. And like there's a little shop where you buy upgrades for your next playthroughs and stuff, right. Which I'm like, oh, that's kind of cool. I'll do that. So like, yeah, I played through this one multiple times where I didn't with Resident Evil 2. I think Resident Evil 2, I just played through the main story, both parts, once, maybe twice. But I was like, okay, I think I'm done. I think I did 1.5. Right here, I'm like, no, I'll burn through it. It's only that.
I forgot. Does 3 have multiple protagonists that you can play as?
No. I mean, there's a second character that you play as a little bit, but you only choose one at the start. Like you choose Jill. It's Jill.
Oh, okay. And
then you there's a break off moment where you play as Carlos the gunman.
Right. Right.
Yeah, I mean, for me, I think I enjoyed it. It was interesting to play through. And like I said, I've played through it multiple times to the point where I'm like, oh yeah, I could get to 2 hours, which is kind of like, ew, but yeah, whatever. It's when you're trapped in your bedroom for isolation, it's something to do. And the fact that they have an incentive for me to play it multiple times by like, oh, like I get these like achievements and stuff, and I get more points to buy more stuff.
Capcom has been on a roll actually with these Resident Evil remakes, and we know 4 is on the way. And you've played, it sounds like, basically the remakes start with 2. Technically, they did a remake for Resident Evil 1 for the GameCube, and then they remade that for more modern consoles. Mm-hmm. And then, but with 2 is when they kind of brought in the engine that kind of established what Resident Evil is now. And they're going forward with that. Overall, with this sort of arc of remakes and where they have to go in the future with 4, 5, and 6. Mm-hmm. How excited are you? How interested are you? What are you looking forward to? What are you maybe concerned about?
I mean, I haven't played any of the new Resident Evils, honestly. I think 5 was the last one I played, so I'm a little bit out of touch.
That's what I hear. What I hear is just don't play 6. 6 is just not worth your time.
I mean, I started it. For some reason, I didn't get very far. I don't remember why. I just didn't. I haven't played 7 or 8 either. But, it's a...
You're not a big first-person guy.
Well, it's weird because I say I'm not, but then also I sometimes am. And I'm also, I say I'm not necessarily a third-person follow cam guy, but yet here I am playing these games. Right, I don't know. I'll probably, I hear they're doing Resident Evil 4 is a remake. I'll definitely pick that one up because that was actually a really solid game.
I remember we called it 4 Resident Evil because that's how it was written on the box.
That's written on the box. Yeah, big 4 there. But yeah, I mean, it's like I think the gameplay that the engine that they have, they found gameplay that works really well. It's not perfect. It's still frustrating at times, but fucking zombie grabbed me again. But it is what it is, right? It's there's no question you get what's on the tin. Mm-hmm. And it's fun. And I think Resident Evil 4 was like a solid play. So yeah, I think, and as they continue to do that and kind of touch up some stuff, I mean, the one thing is also sometimes fixing stuff that was like, ooh, that was bad. Like, there's a character in Resident Evil 3 who's, I forget his name, Tyrell. He's a member, he's not a bad guy. He ends up being like a friend. And I was like, I don't remember this character. And I went and looked him up on like the wiki. I'm like, oh, he's kind of a caricature. At least the image I saw, because he's a black man. Mm-hmm. And I'm like, oh, he looks kind of like maybe this was a little bit suspect in 1999 or whatever it was. A little
Barrett energy there,
right? Like, oh, okay, yeah. These developers didn't really,
these Japanese developers, yeah.
Which they've not had the best luck with. But I think the game looks really good. I think it plays well. So I think this is a positive direction. And I think the big thing is that. One thing I learned is there's actually a Humble Bundle right now for Resident Evil, the whole series, through 7. And including some games I've never even heard of. And the one thing I will say is that I went back to actually replay Resident Evil 0, which I had not played since the GameCube. And I started at like, ooh, wow, this is going to be rough if I play this.
Which one was that?
Right, exactly. It was originally for the N64. It was about Rebecca Chambers has an entire zombie story before she ever sees Chris Redfield, but then fails to mention it to anybody. Right? Like, oh, she's just like the dumb medic. Like, no, she just killed a fucking leech monster. Like, don't. Anyway, she's in shock. That's the story.
I think the main Gaiden, for lack of a better word, that I remember, mostly because of you, because you had a GameCube and you were a fan of Code Veronica.
Yeah.
And like, I'm kind of interested or surprised that they haven't.
Which is on the Dreamcast, but yeah.
Yeah, sorry, I say GameCube, didn't I? I'm surprised that they haven't talked about or mentioned or even referred to that existing. So I wonder if they're going to go back to those, because those are still fodder, because like once we get past 4, because Resident Evil 4 is what kind of creates modern, quote unquote, Resident Evil. Like, why not, before going there, tackle some of the games that have some continuity importance that maybe weren't numbered, and that includes things like Code Veronica, with this sort of remake strain. I don't know.
It wouldn't surprise me if there's some like if Sega actually was involved with it. Like, it would not surprise me.
Sega's just a third party developer at this point.
I know, but I mean, it wouldn't surprise me if they're somehow tied into the like licensing of it, because like they funded it or something. The other thing is also that game, although I always thought it was kind of fun, it does have like some sort of suspect content. I can
see the air quotes there. That was great.
There's some questionable content. Like, if you made it now, you'd have to be like have a real conversation about what does it mean that this character, cross-dresses as his sister.
Oh, right.
In a weird way, and like just to say like because it's played as like it's basically like the kind of psycho, like, oh look, all people that do this are clearly deranged, and it's like that's not necessarily the best message you want to repackage and sell. Sure. And probably they've looked at numbers and say it's just not as popular. Who knows? But
yeah, because of the Dreamcast. But
yeah, right. That's so anyway. It's an interesting thing to replay this game, to actually enjoy it this time, to be be it frustrated at times, but then to have a reason to kind of play it multiple times. Like I say, it's to me like when you're like, oh, you play through again, and you're like, oh look, you unlock stuff that then makes playing through it again easier, right? It's kind of like in the original Resident Evil, like, oh, if you play it fast enough, you get the unlimited ammo whatever. And you're like, oh, good, that would help a lot. And then once you get that, you're like, hey, this game's a lot easier when I don't worry about bullets, you know?
I know exactly what you're talking about. Yeah.
Then you get the unlimited ammo rocket launcher. You're like, wow, this game's a lot easier when I just blow everything up. And you're like, of course, once you get that, you only play through it for like half a session. You're like, okay, that was fun. I'm done now. But it was a good end game. Like, once I can get to the point where I just rocket launch everything, yeah, I'm feeling good about this game. And that's what this is giving me the opportunity to do. And there's all sorts of little, like, oh, you get this, unlock this little tchotchke and this little thing here. I'm like, yeah, that sounds cool. So having a time with it. And like I said, I'm probably looking at playing some of the other ones too.
So Resident Evil is in a space right now.
Yeah, it was my survival horror for my COVID isolation.
Well, good? Question mark? I'm not sure. It sounds like it was equally disappointing or unhelpful as it was exciting and helpful. So
yeah, and and it's always for me as someone, because I always tell people that Resident Evil as a series was it's probably the reason I got a PlayStation, because this weird person that we knew had brought his PlayStation to school for some reason. It was my junior year in high school. For a presentation to show like violence in video games or some shit. And of course, he brought Resident Evil, which is like, oof, that is some pretty violence in video games right there. But I was like, oh man, that game's really cool. Like it reminds me of a game I liked when I was younger.
I was gonna say, yeah.
So that motivated me to like start looking to getting a PlayStation. So that's why, like, for me, Resident Evil's always had a spot, even though I haven't played most of them, and most of them are kind of like suspect. I still, I like the series, even when Capcom tries its best to screw it up. So that was my Week in Geek, Dan. What about you?
I only have one, but that's okay. Because I got to play as a cat.
Oh.
I might have talked about this briefly talked about this on the show before, but I wanted to spend time talking about the game called Stray. Developed by a company called Blue 12, or specifically, the logo just looks like B12. A French studio, but was published by Annapurna Interactive.
Okay.
Who has had
published stuff.
Yeah, they have an incredible record. They started their publishing career with What Remains of Edith Finch, a walking simulator of incredible emotional impact, from what I understand. I have it, but I haven't played it because I heard it makes you feel, and that's sad. But they've gone on to publish a lot of games, including games that we've talked about on the show, things like Outer Wilds. And B12, I think this is their first game, actually. If you're on the internet, it's called the cat game, right? But it's called Stray, where you play as a cat jumping through a dystopian future. And I have completed it. Technically, I think I've probably played through the entire game twice at this point. I've not played it start to finish twice, but with my save, you can jump between chapters.
Okay.
And I'm sure I've replayed each chapter at least once. I love this game. It's a sci-fi dystopia that I really enjoy,
as opposed to the one I did not enjoy. Right.
right. Because it's a future of despair, but not sadness. No, it's a future of melancholy, but not sadness. Actually, is what I meant to say. Like everything is rusted and worn in, but things are carrying on. Right? There's no malevolence to this dystopia either, which everything kind of has this weird earnestness and innocence, I guess. Yeah, that keeps it from being like an all-out bummer. Right? And there's like a depressive tinge to everything, but it's not drenched in it like we would see maybe in other media. And I think it works for the game's benefit. I think the internet kind of pushed this game in a strange direction when it first came out because it was very memeable, and I think part of that was due to the cat side of the internet going like, oh, here's a game where you can play as a cat. And this is all just cat. You can jump, you can scratch, you can meow, right? There is a dedicated meow button in this game. But that's not what the game is. Ostensibly, yes, you're playing as a cat, but also you're playing as basically a drone that attaches itself to the cat, literally and narratively. That's the avenue that you're actually communicating with the world. You're a cat that at the beginning of the game is living with cats in this, open, like storm drain, and with your cat friends, you're jumping from storm drain to storm drain, pipe to pipe, jumping over crevices, and it's very fun. Until your friend cats make a jump and you don't, and you descend, and it's you descend from this green kind of overgrown sort of eco dystopia where it's obvious their civilization is gone and overgrown, but it's still beautiful. And you descend into basically Mad Max Beyond Thunderdome, right? It's just dirty, garbage covered, every graffiti, kind of everything, except for the fact that there's no people. When you run into your first hint of civilization, you're running into robots. That's what was really intriguing to me, is that it's a dystopian future, but not a violent one, in that all the characters that you run into are robots. They're AI. Mm-hmm. But you learn quickly, spoilers, I guess, that instead of like the traditional AI uprising where, you know, the singularity hits and the robots realize they're better than people pieced out long before robots could overtake them. And so what you have left with is kind of a cargo cult kind of situation where you have this synthetic society surrounded by remnants of a culture that they don't understand. And so they try to make sense of it. They try to logic their way out of it. Actually, tie it into Mad Max Beyond Thunderdome. It's very much kind of like the kid cargo cult that Max finds himself in that movie, right? Where they're surrounded by these artifacts of a previous situation. Like, well, people did this and people valued this, and so they do those things. And clearly, at the very least, decades, at most likely centuries have passed since people have left. They've taken what was there, what they do know, and it has completely evolved into something else. So that this AI culture of robots underground has become its own existence. And the best part is like it's literally a fish out of water kind of story, because you're a cat walking through this thing and learning about this culture that is very different but familiar. And so the basic premise of the story is that you are a cat that wants to get back to your cat friends in the above world, right? But you quickly learn that there's this whole part of this, you know, of the planet that is actually sealed off from the outer world, similar to Fallout, right? Where they actually erected a dome that people would survive in the case of catastrophe. The problem is that there's no people there. There's no bones, there's no graves, there's no nothing. It's just robots. And so what the game is, to get the actual what you're doing in the game, it's a split between an exploration game and a puzzle game. And I would say, if I were to assign percentages to it, it's like 75% puzzle game and 25% exploration. Where there's two basic realms where it's kind of an open world where you're jumping around, you're doing side quests, and kind of just talking to everybody that you can meet. And then, but the majority of the game is you going to a room and going like, how do I get past this obstacle? How do I open this door? Puzzle game stuff. It's a really interesting approach to that kind of game because you're a cat. With that in mind, like I said before, and this is important in the sense that it really, they stick the landing with this conceit, in that early on you discover a drone that, when awakened, attaches a backpack to the cat and kind of travels with you. And at that point, it becomes actually a nexus point for interaction with the world around you. Because up until that point, it's not like you as a cat can walk up to a robot and click, you know, a button and talk to a robot, because you're a cat. You don't talk. But once you get this drone attached to you, all of a sudden the option to communicate, to interact, you gather items in your inventory, and you can show characters items in your. It's very adventure game in this way. You can come when you assemble inventory, and when you need to get a task done, you can just wander around the town that you're in, for example, and just show everybody, like, I have this picture. Can you do something with this picture? Right? That kind of stuff. But you can't do that when you're just a cat. And so getting this drone, and the story ultimately kind of becomes about this drone that attaches itself to you, is what creates the actual sort of world building. With the game, because you can all of a sudden talk, because there's no recorded dialogue or audio. Well, there's audio, but it's like Simlish. It's like, well, it's robot Simlish. It's like blah, 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 kind of stuff, and then they type out the dialogue beneath it. But I found it really compelling, and I will say this: like, I don't necessarily call myself a sci-fi fan per se. I love Star Trek, apparently. I'm learning this, right? And I like Star Wars and stuff. I like all the sci-fi stuff fine, but I'm not like invested in the world. And I find myself by the end of this game, because I have played through this game, like I said, I'm like, I loved and wanted to know more about what was going on here. How did this happen? And I will say you get a lot of answers, but I just wanted to play more. I want to see what happens after the end of this game. I haven't really found myself that invested in the science fiction world in a long time. And I think in terms of tone, it reminded me a lot of, and this is not an indication of plot, but just in terms of tone, it reminded me a lot of like Dark City. That kind of like, there's like a lot of like, just there's like
always you trying to bring it back to Dark City.
Always Dark City or Highlander, I'm there, man. But just it feels like there's a lot of stuff going on behind the scenes that you don't know about, but you're slowly learning about, and it feels really old, I guess. Now that being said, I want to talk about how it was to play as a cat, because that's been the big draw, for this game. And I think that's an interesting thing to point out, because yes, you're playing a cat, but it's not like a cat simulator with a jump button, a climb button, or anything like that. It's the way that they deal, because this is going to sound weird. It's an animation first kind of game, meaning that they obviously spend a lot of time, and I think to its benefit, animating the cat, specifically animating different maneuvers, different situations, so that it all links together without being jumpy, without being, without being video gamey. And the way to do that was to limit your interactivity to an extent. So what do I mean by that? There is a jump button, but you can't jump whenever you want to. It's a context-based jumping system in this game, and you can ascend and descend because you're a cat, so you can go anywhere. But basically what you can do is, and the way the game is normally set up, I turn this option off, but let's say you jump up on top of a box. You can't just jump off the box or jump anywhere, like jump up against the wall next to you and fall down to the ground. Instead, the way the game is defaulted is that you kind of have to look around to the left stick, and if there's a point that you can jump to, a prompt appears that allows you to jump to the next point, which allows for smooth animation. I actually turned that option off so that the prompts go away to make for a more naturalistic experience. But it's an interesting kind of mindset, because it makes your actions more deliberate, so that you're not just jumping all over the place, you're not running all over the place. You kind of have to know that there's a jump point. There's a point you can jump to, a point you can interact with. So it's more of like an interact button than it is a jump button. Which speaks to, I think, the puzzle solving nature of this game. It's yes, you're playing as a cat, but it's not a cat simulator. It's a puzzle game in this dystopian future.
Well, but it's also fair to say that cats don't just jump against jump whatever like.
That's fair, right?
Although some cats do, I guess. But.
Right, we've all known those cats. I think that all works to its benefit, because it makes for a very deliberate gameplay, which is they want you to slow down. They want you to explore the world that you're in more than they want you to just be a cat. I will say that the meow button that I talked about, there is a meow button. You can meow pretty much whenever you want, even in cinematic sequences, right? Like you can be sitting there and there's a drone talking to you. You can just spam that meow button. You're just, these stupid cats fucking meow meow meowing all this way through the scene. It doesn't always happen, but generally I would say like 85% of the time you can meow whenever you want to. It's an interesting kind of approach, because it allows them to be more minimalistic with their presentation. To a very effective point, and I should say this without spoilers, the last sort of, scene of the game is pretty powerful, especially if you've had cats. If you like animals, right? If you're a pet owner, there's a pretty the way it ends is pretty evocative of what it means to care for something you can't communicate with, right? Ultimately, I think that's what this game is. This is a game about communication, because you have to communicate with these creatures that yes, they're creatures, even though they're robots, because they're fully autonomous at this point. You have to communicate with these creatures to complete your task of getting back to the overworld, while at the same time kind of satisfying the story of this drone that's attached itself to you. And so it's about learning all the stories, and that's the best part about this game is probably the writing, learning all the stories of this heavily populated underground world dystopia that they've created. And they all have multiple dialogues to interact with and to listen to and to hear. And since you're a cat, yes, when you're interacting with the story of this world, you're basically playing the drone, but you never in direct control of the drone. But as a cat, as the actual character you do have control over, the only button you have for communication is the meow button that doesn't actually start any conversations. It can attract the attention of bad guys, but it's not actually a vector for communication furthering the story. Instead, it's using movement, it's using your mobility, it's using your knowledge of how cats are supposed to work and how to move yourself through space to help people. That actually has this cat, aside from the drone that's attached to it, actually communicate and interact with this world, which is ultimately how we define our relationship with our pets. We talk to them all the time, obviously, but we don't actually have a conversation with them. Instead, it's how they behave. It's how they interact with us based on how they see us behave and the sounds we make and vice versa. That's what creates a connection. It's expressing yourself through means more than just words and text and speech. Because ultimately all that is just making noise. And that more meaningful communication can happen and extends beyond species even through the actions we take with those that we care about. For me, it's a world that I found very interesting and very compelling because it's kind of this weird, lonely, sad, but optimistic and kind of like, we're doing it for ourselves kind of thing, right? It's a great, it's an optimistic dystopia episode title, I guess. But I think if I were to come into this episode with a thesis about this game, it's not just a cat game. And I think for me, it hit particularly hard, not only as a cat owner and as a friend of animals, but just as a sci-fi story. Because it didn't over-explain, it didn't overstay its welcome. It's a short game. And I think the gameplay especially worked to its benefit because it's all very deliberate, very focused, and not a Twitch-based kind of action game, those are fine. I've got nothing wrong. I've got nothing against those. But I wanted a game that let me kind of make deliberate choices in this world. So it's a game with lots of levels and depth that you can pursue. If you want to play it just to be a cat in a sci-fi game, that's great. To that extent, I should talk about how it lets you be a cat very briefly at multiple points through the game for no particular story or narrative-based reason, or even systematic ludic reason, aside from just the joy of doing it. If there's a rug on the ground, no matter where it is, you can go up and press the interact button and scratch it by clicking alternatively the left and right triggers. Right? Just scratch it the fuck up like you're a cat that's here to do some business. You can do that on the corners of sofas. You can just scratch at doors randomly, even though they don't open and pertain to the story at all. Other things, pretty much not whenever, but there are cardboard boxes. This is the funny part of the game. There's a level where you're just kind of exploring. And you find rugs to scratch, couches to scratch, characters to interact with, but you also find empty cardboard boxes. And a prompt pops up, and you just press it, and you jump in the box, and that's it.
That's it.
I'm like, dope! I can jump in a box. Yeah. Until you realize later in the game that is actually a very valuable and important game mechanic, which I'm like, this is genius, and it's just you being a cat. It's not you like doing some upper tier, outsmarting fucking robots, because you're not going to outsmart robots. You're just a cat. But you realize robots don't expect certain things, and jumping into boxes is one of them. And there's also a great little detail in one specific part of the game where there are like paper lunch bags, basically, where you can stick your head and it gets stuck on your head, and it walks through, and it reverses your controls for like 30 seconds, and it's adorable. And then the other thing is there are different parts, and you can get achievement if you go to all these, where you can just hit the interact button and you curl up and go to sleep. And you sleep until you press the button to stop sleeping. And I think there's an achievement where you just let the cat sleep for like an hour. I'm like, do I have the patience for this? I don't know, but I kind of want to. And then the last thing I'll say is, especially with regard to the sleeping, because basically when you go to sleep on a little pillow that's been left out in this like a abandoned apartment, the camera pulls out and just lets you absorb the beautiful environment. This game is a beautiful game with an incredible soundtrack. I've actually I've bought the soundtrack because I loved it that much. So I think it's actually a Sony exclusive, so it's on the PS4 and PS5 now. I think it's also on Steam, which has allowed for a lot of modding. Mm-hmm. So a lot of people have created mods to allow, cats with their personal cat, their own personal cats, coloring patterns be playable. I've also people insert dogs. It's like I love my dog, and so I've seen screenshots of basically a pug jumping around doing all this stuff.
That's a bit strange, but whatever works.
I think someone even put in a 3D model of Garfield if you want to do that jam. So Stray is a game that's getting a lot of lip service the last month I should say. And I think it deserves all of it, but it is more than just the cat game. It is a game that absolutely captured my imagination, especially for me, who played it during bouts of incredible insomnia and anxiety. It was a panacea to the world around me, and it is a game I will not forget for a very long time. It to me, it hit me much harder than I expected, emotionally and just, I think, contextually. That to see people in the discourse that was surfacing about it just call it the cat game kind of disappointed me. I'm like, well, this is a group of people worked really hard to create an interesting world that, it's not the most exciting story in the world, but it's lived in, it's tangible, it's tactile, and the cat is a contrast to the story that's being displayed, not just an avatar for it. And I greatly appreciate that this game exists.
Yeah, well, no, of course, I think it's also being well received, so by people other than you. So
I'm the only one.
Everyone else
Come to me for cat game takes. Next week, Garfield goes large. I don't know if that's a game, but it should be. So if you, dear listeners, have any thoughts about the topics we discussed this week, feel free to leave your thoughts as comments on the page of this episode at forallintents.net.
You can also post your comments or engage in conversations with other listeners on our Facebook page.
You can find us on other social media, such as Twitter and Instagram, where you can find us at our respective handles. On Twitter, you can find Andrew at ProfoundDark, tweeting about tabletop role-playing game. You can find me at dbethel. You can find us on Instagram, where you can find Andrew at ProfoundBrick, and me and my work at dbethelcomics.
While you're at our website at forallintents.net, you can also take a look at our YouTube page. You may already be there listening to our show, which goes up every week on YouTube. If you're there, please go ahead and like and subscribe.
Ring that bell! We use two tracks of music for our show. One is called Disco Medusae, the other is called District 4. And they're both written and performed by Kevin McLeod of the Clan McLeod, immortal swordsman, graph paper enthusiast, and musician extraordinaire.
You can find his music at incompetech.filmmusic.io, and that's all licensed under the Creative Commons 5.0, 4.0, I don't know, something .0 attribution license.
If you like the show and like to help us out, the best way to do so would be to subscribe to the show using whichever podcasting service you happen to use. No matter the service you use, what would help us most would be to leave some sort of review, whether a text review or using the proprietary metric will help spread the word to new potential listeners, the magic of algorithms. Very quickly, Andrew, I know you're sick and we gotta go. You need your rest. But let's talk briefly about Prey.
Why? We haven't seen it.
I know, but it's out. People are loving it. So Prey, if you don't know, is the new, which I love the irony. It's just the cleverness of the title. It's the new Predator movie, and the one thing I want to say is that people seem to love it. But the thing I love about it, and it's getting a lot of ink, is that the Comanche dub. That they went through the effort to do. I think they've been brought in the actual actors from the movie to dub their own lines in Comanche. And that option is available to use for viewers on Hulu, where the movie is currently playing. I would recommend people do that, because why not? Mm-hmm. Right? So, as Andrew hinted, we are both probably going to watch this movie, hopefully within the next week. We'll see how things go. And I'm excited, because I'm actually excited to watch a good Predator movie.
I'm right here.
Exactly. A good one hasn't been made yet. So until a good Predator movie gets made, dear listener, I'm D. Bethel.
And I'm Andrew Asplund.
And for all intents and purposes,
that was a podcast. Miso. It's so hot in here.
Oh my god, are you Jar Jar Binks right now?
You're damn right I am.
Damn! That's what COVID gets you. A few weeks as Jar Jar Binks. Go ahead and answer the door.
I can't answer the door.
Oh shit, you can't answer the door. It makes me think, like, not a lot of games with animal protagonists, I don't think. But presenting animals as protagonists in, like, fairly realistic, quote-unquote, kind of portrayals. Which is probably for the best. Animals... I mean, if you were to do that, animals mostly sleep and lick their butts, right?
Not a very fun game.
No. Although, I'm sure that's on Steam somewhere.
Probably.
We'll fix that in post.